As speedrunning continues to grow, certain figures have begun to develop an almost mythical ethos. These are people who form communities, inspire others, and shape the very identity of speedrunning. When founding a society, every nation needs a myth, a hero to latch onto. People who rose above the rest to serve as a beacon for others to follow. Whether they sit back or fade away, the impact they leave continues to be seen in the people they've influenced. These are the Old Gods of Speedrunning. In the earliest days of any scene, a spark is needed to ignite interest. Someone or something who lays the groundwork for others to build off of. In the case of speedrunning, this spark was John Romero. Romero was a founder and developer for id Software. By the early 90s, the games id released were nothing short of revolutionary. In 1992, the studio would release Wolfenstein 3D and fundamentally change the video game landscape for decades to come. Considered the grandfather of shooters, Wolfenstein combined fluid gameplay with fast-paced action. The game had a clearly defined goal with a high skill ceiling to strive for. In short, it had all the makings of a speedrun. It just needed someone to light the match. In Greek mythology, one of the most famous stories tells the tale of Prometheus. As the story goes, after the creation of all the creatures in the world, Prometheus was tasked with dispersing gifts to each. By the time he reached humans though, all the talons, tails, and wings were gone. Feeling sorry for their disadvantaged state, Prometheus went to the workshop of Hephaestus and Athena to steal fire for the humans. With the gift of fire, Prometheus provided humanity limitless potential to innovate and improve their condition. In the end, Romero would be speedrunning's Prometheus. Even prior to Romero, going fast in games was nothing new, but this was out of necessity rather than desire. Stretching back to the days of quarters and arcade cabinets, video games had an incentive to cycle players through their change as quickly as possible. A timer counting down was a surefire way to accomplish this. Whether it made a player carelessly rush, or time simply expired, players went fast not for fun, but because the game mandated it. This design philosophy carried over into home consoles as well. When playing Super Mario Bros., every quarter has already been spent. There's no need for a timer, it exists simply to make you rush. It took years before this mentality began to change, and nowhere is this more apparent than id Software. More than anything else, for however talented a programmer, designer, or developer he may be, John Romero was a gamer. He simply enjoyed playing games and being good at them. When discussing the game Doom, Romero is noting as having said, "It's a game that rewards your skill, your skillful play, and speedrunning is the ultimate in skillful play." This design philosophy shined through even back when Wolfenstein 3D was released. Upon finishing each level, the game greets you with the completion screen. On this screen, the player can find both the time they took to finish the level and a part time. In an age before the internet was widespread, the player now had a goal to work towards and a time to beat. With the inclusion of just these two details, Romero became speedrunning's Prometheus. He lit the flame for players to prioritize going fast in games that otherwise wouldn't call for speed. He didn't just stop there though. For players that wanted more of a challenge, Romero himself took to speedrunning. The official hit manual for Wolfenstein 3D features a heavily broken down walkthrough of the game. For some levels, the walkthrough even includes a record time set by Romero himself. These times were significantly lower than the part time on each stage, providing players with even more incentive to grind and improve at the game. This design philosophy would only expand into future id Software titles. The 1993 game Doom would further revolutionize speedrunning through its inclusion of playback demos. Much like Wolfenstein, Doom featured times for the player to compare to, but it also allowed players to create a file that recorded their inputs. This file could then be uploaded to the internet and played back by anyone who downloaded it. This small inclusion allowed for verifiable runs to be viewed around the world in a time before widely available video sharing. Communities would form around Doom that valued skillful and speedy play. Challenges would be designed, with completion being the first objective, and the fastest completion being the most highly valued. Prometheus' story is not one of triumph though. In giving humans the greatest gift he could bestow, he had stolen from the gods. For his crimes, Zeus sentenced him to be chained to a rock and an eagle tasked with eating his liver each day, only for it to grow back the next. As speedrunning's Prometheus, John Romero would meet a similar fate. The release of Quake on June 22, 1996 would usher speedrunning into a new age. The game would also be Romero's last with id Software, as he would resign 45 days later on August 6th. Romero would leave his magnum opus to both gaming and to speedrunning, never reaching these same heights again. Instead, he would spend the next 3 decades starting over and rebuilding time and time again, never achieving what he had left. While Romero was gone, others were there to pick up where he had left off. Romero had given the players everything they needed to create a thriving scene. All that was left was for someone to start piecing it together. While communities existed for sharing Doom demos, it wasn't until Quake that things really began to click. Immediately after the game was released, demos would be uploaded via file transfer protocol to Walnut Creek CD-ROM. It was here that a man by the name of Nolan Radix would decide to create his own site dedicated to hosting Quake demos, leading to Nightmare Speed demos being made in early 1997. Nightmare Speed demos only hosted demos of the game played on the Nightmare difficulty. Eventually in 1998, NSD merged with another demo hosting site for other difficulties, and Speed Demos Archive was formed. For the next decade, SDA would be the center of the speedrunning universe, and Radix would be its leader. For a while, the world was going Radix's way. Everything he did would go on to define some part of the future of speedrunning. Some might even say he had the Midas touch. In most tellings of the story, Midas was an Anatolian king. One day, a satyr drank too much and wandered into Midas' home, where he was hospitably treated. As it turned out, the satyr was the foster father of Dionysus. Upon his return to Dionysus, the Greek god offered to grant Midas anything he wished. Midas asked for the power to change anything he touched to gold, so Dionysus fulfilled it. Midas would come to regret this wish. Beginning while the site was still NSD, Radix would help to undertake some of the most important projects in speedrunning history to that point. Quake Done Quick. Quake Done Quick was a series of speedruns performed by several runners of Quake on the Nightmare difficulty, with the goal of creating the fastest playthrough possible. Up to this point, speedrunning was largely contained to a single level. Players grinded to perfect the game level by level, rather than approaching the game as a whole. Quake Done Quick changed this. The first iteration was released in June of 1997, clocking in at a time of 1949 and being performed by Radix and 2 other runners. The project would continue to expand and get faster. By September of 2000, a team of nearly 20 people came together to create Quake Done Quick with a vengeance. The run featured every known trick up to that point, including some of the earliest uses of bunny hopping, and came in over 7 minutes faster than the original, with a time of 12:23. The prevalence of full game speedruns would only increase in the time since Quake Done Quick, with it being the predominant way speedruns are performed now. Quake Done Quick's influence extends far past this though. The speedrunning marathon Games Done Quick pays homage to the project. The early days of SDA would form a close-knit community, especially among the Quake Done Quick contributors. So close-knit that, despite being as far apart as Singapore and Washington, the runners wanted to meet up in person. It all began with an email to the Quake Done Quick group. Soon after, a progress page was created to organize everyone's schedule for the summer. Before they knew it, over a dozen people, Radix included, were making their way to Tampere, Finland for SpeedCon 2000. Although it predates the age of live streaming, this marked the first time that a group of speedrunners were on record coming together from around the world to grind out runs. SDA would remain Quake exclusive for several years. It wasn't until Metroid Prime came out that this would see a change. Radix began speedrunning Metroid and wanted somewhere to host his runs. Seeing as he had SDA at his disposal, he figured why not just host them there. After the positive reception to this decision, Radix opened up SDA to other games on March 2nd, 2004. For the first time, every game had a place where people could go to see it be speedran. In the beginning, this ran fine. Radix had been very good at administering the site for Quake demos, so naturally some of this would carry over to other speed games as well. The only issue was that Radix never adapted his approach for other games. Rules that made sense for Quake didn't always make sense when removed from this context. In many ways, Radix's view on speedrunning was rooted in the same mentality that John Romero shared. It was to be used as an extension of skillful play. Anything that did not resemble skillful play, even if it would have been faster, was viewed with disdain. Most notably, this meant that death abuse was disallowed. While taking a death may spawn the player in an advantageous position, dying was not something a skillful player would do. The same was true for going out of bounds. Since it was less aesthetically pleasing, it was banned. By 2006, Radix's Midas touch had begun to overstay its welcome. No longer a kid with all the time in the world, Radix would get a job in March, 2 years after he had opened SDA up to the masses. He would step down from administering the site that year, and began posting less and less frequently. After a decade in the scene, Radix would slowly fade out. In the meantime, SDA would continue to be the center of speedrunning, with modern faces beginning to emerge. There are few people in speedrunning whose accomplishments are more well known than Andrew G. Andrew G is the man who broke the last-minute barrier in Super Mario Bros. But in order to understand Andrew G, we must first travel around the world and go back a few years. The year is 2003, and something magical is making its way through internet forums. Perhaps the greatest speedrun anyone had ever seen. Super Mario Bros. 3 beaten in 11 minutes and 3 seconds by Morimoto. The run was flawless. Mario reached and maintained P-speed quickly, didn't take any bad deaths, and got seemingly perfect RNG. The run was too good to be true. It quickly became the stuff of legends, breaking out of the speedrunning bubble and onto any website where videos were being shared. This introduced a whole world of people who had never even heard of the concept of speedrunning, with their first impressions being that of perfection. One person that was inspired by this run was a 13-year-old named Andrew. Super Mario Bros. 3 would be the first game Andrew G would speedrun, beating it in just over 14 minutes. Had it not been for Morimoto, Andrew G may have never gotten into speedrunning. The only issue was that Morimoto's run was not what people believed, but rather it was something more akin to speedrunning's Trojan horse. It wasn't that Morimoto wanted to trick people, but rather it was the perfect storm of language barriers and unfamiliar technology. The 1103 wasn't a normal speedrun, but rather one of the earliest examples of a tool-assisted speedrun, or TAS. A TAS is a playthrough of a game where each frame of input is strictly determined. Through the use of save states, slowing down the game, and value manipulations, a TAS is able to implement all the knowledge a community has about a game, creating what is theoretically a flawless speedrun. Not long after creating the run, Morimoto would make a post answering some common questions, including whether the run was cheated. It was here that he revealed that the run was created by slowing the game down and reloading save states. By this point, the run had already gone viral though. The issue was further compounded by the post being made in Japanese, leading to its circulation being slow outside of Japan. When people found out that the run was not performed by a person, many felt betrayed. They believed that they were intentionally deceived. It didn't help that, for many at the time, speedrunners and tassers were in opposition to each other. Many people believed Morimoto's run to be the greatest speedrun to that point, a trophy that celebrated the feats of humanity. In actuality though, this achievement would reveal itself to be speedrunning's greatest Trojan horse. The fact that the run was not performed by a person does not erase the impact it had though. It remains many speedrunners' first introduction to the concept, and served as their first inspiration to begin running. Andrew G would soon move on to a different Mario game though. From the beginning, Andrew had his eyes set on many different games to get the world record in. He wanted to hold the world record in each of Super Mario Bros. 1, 2, and 3. In short, he would need to overcome an Herculean effort. The labors of Hercules were a 12-trial-long act of repentance to prove that Hercules was worthy of immortality. Over the course of a decade, Hercules had to serve his cousin, King Eurystheus of Mycenae, tackling any quest that Eurystheus tasked him with. While this required performing many less than glamorous acts, the ends would justify the means. For Andrew G to accomplish his goal, he would have to do much of the same. He would quickly put up some impressive times in several games, becoming a SMB2 world record contender in a matter of weeks after joining SDA. By August of 2005, his warpless SMB1 time of 21:18 would be verified as the world record by Twin Galaxies, as well as tying the any% record. In addition to SDA, Twin Galaxies was one of the most important places for speedrunning at this time. Since the 80s, Twin Galaxies has had an affiliation with Guinness World Records, providing them with video game related records. This led to Twin Galaxies carrying a certain weight and prestige at this time. With it being a legacy organization though, it featured an even more stringent rule set than even SDA. For instance, for the warpless category, players were not allowed to even use in-level pipes like the one found in 1.1. In time, this would prove to be a point of contention. The last time Andrew G would submit a run under the Twin Galaxies rule set would be in 1957 in February of 2007, breaking the sub-20 barrier. After this though, Andrew decided to push the game to its true limit. He came out swinging, beating Scott Kessler's any% record of 5:05 by nearly 5 seconds in April of 2007. Andrew took advantage of SDA's more open rule set. He used a wrong warp in 4.2 that allowed Mario to skip the vine climbing cutscene, as well as a pixel-perfect wall jump in 8.4 to enter a pipe without hitting the invisible blocks next to it. Combined with solid execution, the time now stood at 5 minutes 355 milliseconds, desperately close to an immortal achievement. This is where SMB1 would stand for a while though. Andrew would move on to Super Mario Bros. 2 after this. When talking about SMB2, there's always some confusion as it refers to different games depending on region. The version that released in the United States is referred to as Super Mario USA in Japan, while the Japanese Super Mario Bros. 2 is known as the Lost Levels in the United States. Andrew G wanted both of these records. He set a record of 9:15 in Super Mario USA in July of 2007, before setting a Lost Levels world record in May 2008 with a time of 8:34. Before achieving the Lost Levels record though, Andrew returned to Super Mario World, where he got an 11:008, beating Morimoto's task by around 3 seconds. When Andrew G started speedrunning, he had a list of games he wanted to achieve the record in. By May of 2008, all that was left was Super Mario Bros. 3. This too would soon fall, leaving Andrew G as either the active or former world record holder of every mainline Super Mario game released to consoles in the first 20 years of the series' history. While this was an impressive task and more than enough to make his way into the history scripts, he still had his eyes set on immortality, and there was one surefire way to achieve it. In April of 2007, Andrew had set an incredible world record in the first Super Mario game, but he left it mere fractions of a second away from breaking the final minute barrier the game would ever see. All that was needed was one last Herculean effort in a journey defined by them. On December 23, 2010, Andrew got as close as he could to setting a new world record, tying his now over 3-year time to the frame. While this was surely a sign that things were looking up, few would guess what then happened. The next day, December 24th, Christmas Eve, Andrew got a run like no other. Not only did he achieve the sub 5, he obliterated it, with the time coming in at 4:59.690. And just like that, Andrew G became immortal. In a community defined by unrelenting progress, few accomplishments ring eternal like being the person to break the last minute barrier in the most important game ever. Now at the dawn of a new era, a new generation of speedrunners were primed to take shape. Narcissa began speedrunning in the SDA days, but her significance truly begins in 2009. That year, Narcissa would have found a website known as Speedruns Live with a community member named Giano. SRL added a new layer to speedrunning: racing. Players would start their runs at the same time to see who was able to beat the game faster. During the race, runners would be able to communicate through text channels. This created a dynamic in speedrunning that wasn't possible in the forum era. Now, speedrunners were able to form a more active competition that played out in minutes and hours rather than weeks and months. It also allowed the focus to shift away from being solely world record centric to one that valued attempted runs more. Whether they knew it or not, SRL perfectly set up speedrunning for its next era. In March of 2007, a man by the name of Justin Kahn decided to wear a camera and broadcast the entirety of his life, setting up the website justin.tv to showcase it. Over the next few years, the people who had access to the site would gradually expand, with the gaming category eventually being split into its own site and given the name twitch.tv in June of 2011. It was here that speedrunning truly took a leap forward. By the end of the year, speedrunning streams grew from having less than 100 viewers to thousands, with Narcissa being one of the chief beneficiaries. This was by no means an accident though. Narcissa was a very talented runner who played a very popular game. While skilled in several games, Narcissa is best known for her accomplishments in The Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time. She set her first world record in the Medallions, Stones, Trials, or MST category in February of 2011, largely dominating the category that year. June would also see her take the any percent record for the first time during a race she was doing on Speedruns Live. In doing so, she broke a nearly year-old record. For a number of years, this would continue to be the case. Narcissa would continue to stream to huge numbers, continue to speedrun, and continue to set world records in different games. By all accounts, it seemed like an entirely enviable position. Unfortunately, Narcissa's story doesn't have a good ending. In Greek mythology, most stories don't end happily, but few of them have the same level of despair as the life and death of Theseus. Theseus is the founder king of Athens, one of the greatest and most important cities. Over the course of his life, Theseus would accomplish many heroic feats, with none being more celebrated than his encounter with the Minotaur. Every year, several Athenian children were sent to the island of Crete to be sacrificed to the Minotaur. Theseus volunteered in the place of one of these children in hopes of coming to terms with the monster. He would sneak a sword into the labyrinth which held the Minotaur, and upon seeing it, slew the beast. For his efforts, Theseus would win great favor and popularity with his people. As time passed though, these heroic acts would fade from people's minds. Those who once celebrated Theseus would rebel against his rule. Theseus met these demands head on, abdicating his throne and fleeing to the islands. It was here that Theseus would be killed at the hands of a man posing as his friend and tossed him from the hills into the sea. In the end, despite being someone who once had it all, Theseus died a disgraced death. In the case of Narcissa, Theseus offers an unfortunate parallel. After several years at the top, Narcissa experienced one of the greatest falls from grace in speedrunning history. The start of a slow decline is often hard to define, especially in the moment. But for Narcissa, the beginning of the end was June 14th, 2015. In another timeline, this day would represent the pinnacle of Narcissa's career. For the first time in 25 years, Nintendo was hosting the Nintendo World Championships. A total of 16 contestants were invited to compete. At 8 Best Buys around the United States, a qualifier was held to see who would score the highest number of points playing a copy of Ultimate NES Remix, with the runner at each qualifier being offered a spot at the finals. In addition to these 8, a further 6 speedrunners and 2 celebrity contestants were invited, Narcissa included. By and large, Narcissa proved she was worth the invitation. The tournament featured a unique double elimination bracket. Following the first stage, 4 of the 16 competitors would be sent to the Underground. Here, they would compete in a new game, with the winner staying alive but remaining in the Underground, while the rest of the Underground was eliminated. This process would repeat for stages 2 and 3, after which the final survivor from the Underground would rejoin the last 3 competitors in the semifinals, with the top 2 moving on to the finals. Narcissa would survive the first 2 games before finding herself in the Underground after a disappointing performance in Mario Kart 8. Teetering on the edge of elimination, Narcissa would have to beat the other 5 residents of the Underground by setting the highest score in Balloon Fight, an NES title from 1984. In the last moments of the game, Narcissa would clutch out a win, scoring just over 12,000 points before the horn sounded, narrowly beating Aaron Hansen of the Game Grumps, who scored 11,610. The semifinals was Super Smash Bros. For Wii U. Having experience playing Smash competitively, Narcissa would edge out Trihex and Madamage, joining John Numbers in the finals to compete in custom levels of Super Mario Maker. For each level 1, a 15-second head start would be given in the final stage, with both playing at the same time. The first level would not go in Narcissa's favor. She would fail to complete the level in the allotted time, while John Numbers finished with time to spare. She would make a comeback in the Super Mario 3 level to even out the timer, before falling behind again in Super Mario World. It would all come down to the final level though. John would make the most of his lead, making it through most of the first room before Narcissa could even touch the controller. Unfortunately for her, being able to play didn't make much of a difference. John continued to make much of the level look easy, while Narcissa failed to rise to the occasion. In the end, it wasn't even close. Narcissa hadn't even made it to the second room by the time John was fighting Bowser. Over the following years, Narcissa's audience would continue to shrink, culminating in March of 2022. After receiving a temporary ban, Narcissa would threaten to take her own life, as well as the lives of staff at Twitch headquarters, leading to her account being permanently suspended. At a point in time, Narcissa was one of the most beloved speedrunners ever. She had the world at her fingers, only to let it slip away. But for however far she has fallen, it only exemplifies how high she had climbed.
Oh! It's over. Ocarina of Time is dead. Any percent is done. That's it. That's it.
When people talk about Narcissa, it's not long before another name comes up. Siglemic was a Super Mario 64 speedrunner in the early days of Twitch. When people talk about speedrunning at this time, they largely mean Narcissa and Siglemic. In terms of impact, Siglemic was the same as Narcissa, except on an even larger scale. There are few streamers more important to the beginning of Twitch than Siglemic. This was made no more apparent than when Twitch introduced its partnership program. Mere months after being spun off from Justin.tv into its own service, Twitch announced that streamers would be able to apply to make money on the site. By having a high enough viewership, streamers would be given a subscription button. Viewers could opt to pay $4.99 a month, with this money being divided between the streamer and Twitch itself. By January of 2012, Siglemic would be accepted into this program, making him one of the first 10 streamers to ever make money directly from Twitch. Siglemic was more than just accolades and status though. In the truest sense, he was someone who mattered to others. There's probably no individual who single-handedly inspired more people to pick up a controller and start speedrunning. Few people can say an entire era of speedrunning was defined by them, but even fewer can say that their influence went on to shape the next generation as well. In 2012, during the month of August, Siglemic would dedicate 12 hours a day each day to grind Super Mario 64. Thousands of people came to watch him. The month proved to be a success in more than just viewership though. Siglemic set multiple world records that August, including a 146 and the first 145 in 120 star, before setting the first 144 a few days into September. He set his last record in April of 2014, beating his nearly year-old time. For nearly 2 years, Siglemic sat atop the most prestigious category in all of speedrunning. Since losing the record in May of 2014, with only a few exceptions, the 120-star record has been held by a runner directly inspired by Cyclemic and the effort he put into speedrunning the game, with some crediting him as the reason they began playing. Rather than mirroring a Greek tragedy, Cyclemic embodies a different ethos. Lucius Quintus Cincinnatus was a consul in the early days of the Roman Republic, and the namesake of Cincinnati, Ohio. A few years after his term as consul, Rome would find itself in a difficult position. With the army in danger, the Senate decided to appoint a dictator and turn to Cincinnatus. At this point, Cincinnatus had retired from politics. When the messengers came to inform him of his position, they found Cincinnatus plowing his farm. As a loyal Roman, he laid down what he was doing to help the cause. The role of dictator gave Cincinnatus unparalleled power to address the problem, on the condition that the term can only last for the shorter of 6 months, or the issue is resolved. The Romans always feared appointing a dictator though, as it would not take much for 6 months to turn into a lifetime. The next day, Cincinnatus would raise a massive army and set off to the siege that was threatening the Roman camp. The troops were quickly rescued, and within 15 days of being appointed, Cincinnatus relinquished his power and returned to his farm. Decades later, Rome would again come knocking on Cincinnatus' door, and just like before, he addressed the problem in a matter of days and held on to power for not a moment longer. In many respects, Cyclemic would parallel Cincinnatus. At the dawn of a new age, he filled his role and then walked away. But just like Cincinnatus, when Cyclemic is needed, he's there. At PACE 2019, Cyclemic would participate in a 4-way 120-star race. While it being the first time people saw him speedrun Mario in years was significant in its own right, Cyclemic would do something unique. While going to collect the Blast to the Stone Pillar Star in Jolly Roger Bay, Cyclemic would switch to a box controller. He would then perform a trick known as frame walking, which requires the player to alternate between analog up and neutral stick. By mapping analog up to a button, Cyclemic was able to mash his way up a near vertical wall. While Cyclemic's use of this setup was fairly non-controversial, it would prove to be one of the most decisive tricks SM64 has ever seen once more runners began using it. Cyclemic's use of the trick forced the community to address the issue by bringing it to the big stage, rather than letting it continue lurking in the background. Nearly a decade later, Cyclemic remains a beloved figure, even if he's not active like he once was. As far as the people who shaped speedrunning, there are few who have a higher approval rating than Cyclemic. But that doesn't mean there are none. For most people, the story of speedrunning is told in the voice of Summoning Salt. Salt is a speedrunning YouTuber best known for creating the world record progression genre. Prior to him, there were no channels dedicated to the creation of speedrunning history content. Before he was known for making videos though, Salt was a top-level runner in Mike Tyson's Punch-Out for the NES. While he was a part of the community since the early 2010s, Salt's first uploaded run would not come until January 2016. By March, he took the world record and has not relinquished his throne in the 7 years since. Of the 7 categories for Mike Tyson speedrunning, Salt holds 6 of the records. To define him solely as a YouTuber, documentarian, or historian severely undersells who Summoning Salt is. As a speedrunner, Salt is a high-level competitor in several games, and the best at others. In another timeline, Summoning Salt is best known for his achievements in speedrunning. In this world though, he became the voice of speedrunning. His legacy would change forever in January of 2017. After sitting on the idea for a few months, Salt finally decided to make his first world record progression on the game he knew best, Mike Tyson's Punch-Out. He would quickly follow this up a few days later with a video on Super Mario Bros. 1. This video would catch the eye of the game's world record holder Darbian, and from there, the rest is history. Salt has continued making videos and refining his style, with his acclaim and legacy only growing. Legacy is a weird concept though. There are few writers more important than Homer. Born in the 8th century BC, Homer is best known as the author of the Iliad and the Odyssey. Both these stories are an essential part of the literary canon, still being widely read nearly 3 millennia later. That said, Homer did not write either story. Both the Iliad and the Odyssey, along with countless other stories less famous or lost to time, had long been a part of ancient Greece's oral tradition. Stories were passed person to person, widely known and changing slightly with each retelling. What Homer did was write these stories down. In doing so, he created a standardized version to something with countless variations. This doesn't minimize the importance of Homer or his contributions to literature. Had he not written down these stories, they likely would have been lost to time like any other tale that falls out of favor. Summoning Salt is speedrunning's Homer. The narratives he crafted and structures he created have opened the medium of speedrunning up to a broader audience than ever before, while also laying the groundwork for countless to follow in his footsteps of content creation. It's also important to remember though that a world record history is the story of a community. It tells the tale of people who pour their time into a game for the slimmest of chances to finish it quicker. Whether anyone hears them or not, their stories existed before the creation of a video. The work of Summoning Salt is memorializing the labors of these communities, opening up histories for the masses so that regardless of what happens, a record of their efforts exists. If you enjoyed the video, please consider liking it and hitting the subscribe button. History is littered with the tales of tragedy and triumph that makes up a nation's story. While many have worked to push speedrunning forward, few have contributed as much to help it get to the point where it is today. Thank you for watching, and see you again real soon.